Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series in which we give Precon decks a glow up without breaking the bank. My name's Grazzet, and today we'll be giving the Modern Horizons 3 Tricky Terrain Precon $35 worth of upgrades to bring it up to Cut Rate standards. As usual though, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content. Consider supporting the channel directly either via my Buy Me a Coffee or my Game Nerds affiliate links in the description if you really like it, and be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what Precon we'll be covering next. Also, if you'd like to see my blind reaction and thoughts to the Precon itself before we make any changes, you can do so by checking out my first impressions of it also in the description. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. This deck's face commander is Omo, Queen of Vesuva, a 1/5 shapeshifter noble that costs 2 and a hybrid simic with the following ability. Whenever she enters the battlefield or attacks, we put an everything counter on up to 1 target land and up to 1 target creature. Each land with an everything counter is every land type in addition to its other types, and each non-land creature with an everything counter is every creature type. Breaking down her core stats, Omo is packing a relatively low CMC, a low power high toughness stat block for her cost, and an ability that enables her to repeatedly turn our creatures into pseudo-changelings and our lands into every subtype in existence, provided we can keep her in play since this effect stops working if she leaves play, which may not do anything on its own, but does enable some very interesting possibilities. For example, on the land side of things, since it's the direction that this Precon is almost entirely focusing on, Omo's everything counters at base fix us for our colors since it functionally allows any lands with them to tap for any color by granting them all basic land types, which admittedly may not be that impressive in a 2-color deck, but does allow the build to contain more colorless utility lands without worrying about missing out on colored pips. And beyond that, easily empowers lands that care about other lands of a certain type being in play, whether those be specific lands such as in the case of Tron lands, which instantly come online if even a single counters on one of our lands for additional ramp, or more subtype specific lands such as Gate and Locust payoffs, which continually grow in power with every single land we get a counter on. And that's not even considering land payoffs that aren't lands themselves, which again just grow more and more in power and potency with every land that becomes converted. And then, on the creature side of things, the same principles can be applied but to tribal payoffs instead, allowing any of our creatures to benefit from the best lords our colors have at their disposal, as well as allowing us to generate value off of them alongside tribal payoffs, all while our creature base contains a myriad of creature types instead of committing to a single tribe so we can cherry pick the best effects. And it's actually going to be in this category that we're going to be focusing most of our efforts in this upgrade, as the base build already has a very respectable land game plan built in, but virtually no payoffs for the creature portion of our commander's effect, which ultimately leaves quite a bit of untapped power on the table. So, in an effort to tap into that power to get the most usage out of both sides of our commander's effect, we'll be adding in a variety of tribal lords to the build in order to initially empower and protect Omo so she can safely swing in to spread her counters, which will eventually empower our entire creature base as Omo converts them so they can be augmented by our lord's effects as well, along with a suite of tribal payoffs that will generate us more and more ramp, draw, and disruption as we slowly convert our field into pseudo-changelings for maximum value. That said, we won't entirely be ignoring the land side of our deck either, as we'll also be increasing our number of ways to get additional lands into play to take advantage of our higher than average land base, as well as adding a few more utility lands to the build for us to take advantage of, ultimately bringing both sides of Omo's kit to bear against our opponents instead of just a land portion so they can face the full power of the shape changers of Vesuva. So let us make our way to the plane of Dominaria and to the Isle of Vesuva, the native home of the Shapeshifters and their queen, the twin sisters Omo. Having undergone a magical rite to ascend to the throne by melding their minds into one, they are now a singular entity, with one half looking into the future to ensure Vesuva is restored to its former glory after its devastation in the aftermath of Yawgmoth's invasion of the plane, and the other half looking into the past to ensure that their empire would be rooted in the wisdom and history of all those that came before them. And as queen, they would ensure Vesuva would prosper in the present, far removed from the rest of Dominaria. Luminaria, with their powerful illusions and vast reservoirs of shape-changing flowstone acting as quite an effective deterrent to anyone who would seek to do their kingdom harm, allowing them and their shape-changing subjects to live and rebuild in peace. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. Kicking things off with the new creature-centric additions we'll be adding to the build so we can actually take advantage of the creature-focused portion of Omo's kit, we'll start by adding in some tribal lords to our ranks to help empower Omo and our board as they slowly become all creature types. Starting off on the more defensive side of things, we'll be replacing Replication Technique, which is admittedly a solid clone effect that can work nicely to multiply our lords, payoffs, and even lands twice, but loses out since we need the space for more of those cards to enable us in the first place, with Timber Protector, which provides a typical lord AoE stat bump and makes all our changeling and forests apart from itself indestructible, which goes a long way to keep Omo and the rest of our board alive while protecting our utility lands from destruction, and cutting both Fog Bank and Propaganda, which would find much better homes in a Pillow Fort style build where their powerful defensive body and attack prevention can be put to better use, in favor of Lord of the Unreal and Scion of Una, both of which provide even more AoE stat boosts and this time targeted removal protection to help keep our commander and eventually our board screened against any spot removal that may come its way, with the former also notably protecting itself with its own effect once it gains all creature types to make it particularly hard to deal with. Then on the more value-oriented front, we'll be sidelining the alternate commander for this deck, Joti Moag Ancient, whose Arbor Elf creating effect is interesting, but lacks the land creature support they need to really thrive in this build, to make space for Hawkball of the Surging Soul, whose ability to have all our converted creatures explore each turn allows us to both fill up our hands with lands and empower our creatures, thereby enabling both aspects of our game plan, and whose on-attack extra land drop/draw are also appreciated as a source of repeatable value, as well as sidelining Elvish Rejuvenator, whose land ramp is okay but loses out to its replacement, the better Elf Druid Elvish Archdruid, which provides much more ramp by functioning as a mana dork that scales with the number of creatures we have in play with everything counters on them, enabling it to generate huge swaths of mana for us while also empowering those creature stats as well. And finally, to close out the new wave of tribal lords we'll be adding to the build, we'll be slotting in some more offensively oriented options by scrapping Oblivion Stone, which is far too slow of a board wipe for us to effectively use here, so we can add in Feline Sovereign, whose AoE stat bump and the on-damage artifact/enchantment destruction it grants to all our pseudo-changelings as they get in for damage, provides the build with even more reach and disruption as we continually swing in, and letting go of Vivian Reed, whose draw, removal, and anthem are all serviceable, but the final build has better options in all three categories, to make space for Baru Wormspeaker, who provides a big AoE stat boost and a trample to ensure all our pseudo-changelings can reliably get in for damage, while also taking advantage of their empowered stats by repeatedly creating 4/4 tokens that he turns into 6/6 tramplers to build up our board even further. Now, still staying on the creature game plan, but switching gears from lords and onto tribal payoffs that are more focused around padding our core stats, we'll be slotting out Satyr Wayfinder, whose milling cantrip is not good for us in this build since we don't have too many ways to make use of our graveyard for value, and Poison Dart Frog, which is an okay mana dork, but again, we just have better options available to us, to slot in Harabaz Druid and Priest of Titania, which, like the previously added Elvish Archdruid, both generate us huge amounts of mana that scale with our board of pseudo-changelings, replacing Treasure Cruise, whose draw that we can make cheaper via Delve is fine but a bit too generic for our purposes, and Seer's Sundial, which is again serviceable as a way for us to turn our land drops into card advantage, but we simply have better options that leave our mana open to do other things with Azami Lady of Scrolls and Seagate Loremaster, both of which turn our entire board of pseudo-changelings into repeatable sources of card advantage advantage, either by tapping them down to draw, or by tapping itself down to draw equal to the number of them we have in play. And, as our final pair of tribal-oriented additions, we'll be removing Rampant Frogantula, which is a fine card that would find a better home in a build more geared towards taking advantage of its graveyard rather than this one, and Evacuation, which is a bit too indiscriminate of a wipe that sets us back just too much if we need to use it, so we can give their spots to Cyclone Summoner and Whelming Wave, both of which are one-sided tribal wipes that allow us to keep all our pseudo-changelings, while, typically, mass-bouncing all our opponent's creatures and or non-land permanents for us to either retake control of the board, or simply clear the way for a game-ending Alpha Strike. So, having beefed up the creature-based portion of our build so we can now actually take advantage of our commander's ability, let's switch our focus to the handful of new additions we'll be making to the land-oriented portion of our game plan, which will mostly consist of getting more of our lands into play to take advantage of the 40 lands the final build contains. As such, we'll be cutting the too symmetrical Graveyard Recursion piece Skullwinder, the bit too basic Draw Source Harmonize, and the decent but underwhelming in this build removal piece Acidic Slime, so we can give their spots to Azusa Lost But Seeking, Case of the Locked Hothouse, and Oracle of Moldiah, all of which provide us with extra land drops to make use of our larger than average land base for additional ramp, the first getting us 2 extra land drops for even more ramp, the second only netting us 1 but eventually letting us cast spells and play lands off the top of our deck to generate repeatable card advantage, and the third also netting us 1 extra land drop while also letting us play lands off the top of our deck by default to make it even easier for us to take advantage of those extra land drops, as well as slotting out Hydra Broodmaster, which is a decent mana sink to pump our huge amounts of mana into to flood the board with tokens, but doesn't really help enable our playstyle in any meaningful way, to slot in Bonnie Paul Clearcutter, who provides the build with even more draw and extra land drops as our creatures swing in, while her token Bow functions as a land's payoff by growing in size as we make those land drops. And lastly, as 2 more pieces of land support, we'll be replacing Hidden Nursery, which is a decent source of discover when we no longer have need for the mana it generates, but is generally too slow and costs a bit too much to use, with Crop Rotation, which gives us another way to tutor up our lands directly into play, thereby improving the deck's consistency and making combos like Dark Depths and Thespian Stage much more reliable, and dismissing Summary Dismissal, which is a fine counterspell but not really what we're looking for here, to bring forth Omen Path Journey, which functions as both another land tutor and a source of ramp that allows us to cherry pick the 5 best lands in our 99, and ensure we'll be getting them all into play on the following 4 turns to both improve our land base's speed and reliability. Then, adding in a new pair of utility lands to help us get a bit more mileage out of said land base, we'll be terraforming both Desert of the Mindful and Desert of the Indomitable, which are a bit too slow with not enough upside to warrant their inclusion, into Baldur's Gate and Urza's Cave, the former eventually turning into a ramp source as we convert enough of our lands into gates to generate us even more mana, and the latter giving us access to yet another land tutor to ensure we can get our most powerful lands into play as consistently as possible. And at last, reaching the tail end of our upgrades, we'll be padding our core stats a bit by raising the excess subpar lands Thornwood Falls and Quandrix Campus to make room for the removal spells Reality Shift and Resculpt, both of which provide respectable exile-based removal to cheaply deal with otherwise resilient threats, and swapping out the bit too slow Discover land Hidden Cataract with the scalable draw spell Pull from Tomorrow, which gives us another way to turn our massive mana reserves into card advantage so we can reload our hands at instant speed. So, now that we've covered all 24 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 14 cards that care about creature types, 7 of which are tribal lords and 8 of which are tribal payoffs, giving us a decent suite of cards that take advantage of and benefit from our commander effectively turning our creature base into changelings for extra stats, keywords, and value, 37 cards that care about lands, 11 of which specifically care about land types, and 11 of which get us extra lands into play, providing us with a robust selection of land-oriented selected cards to take advantage of almost everything counters to generate us even more value, and 7x spells to give us a handful of ways to weaponize all our mana generation. For general deck stats, we have 27 ramp sources, 16 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 4 board wipes. Our ramp and draw being well above average in this build, the former due to us being primarily a land-focused deck and being geared towards enabling that land base as much as possible, and the latter due to a good portion of our creature base being focused around generating us value in the form of card advantage so we can make use of all the ramp we have at our disposal. Looking at our mana curve, we have an average CMC of 3.42, leaving us with a mid-weight curve that aims to make a beeline for our commander as quickly as possible so she can begin converting herself, then our other creatures and lands into pseudo-changelings as she comes down and starts swinging in. Then from there, it's just a matter of bringing down payoff after payoff to take advantage of our all-type creatures and lands, using tribal lords to empower Omo and our board with additional stats and resilience, tribal payoffs to turn our board of pseudo-changelings into value, land payoffs to accelerate and derive value from our gigantic land base, and X spells to sink all that mana into in order to weaponize it, until our opponents are overwhelmed by a mishmash of the most powerful archetypal cards our colors have at their disposal that Omo has turned into a unified and terrifying fighting force. The final price of this build then comes out to be $100.30 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $65, which was the lowest price I could find. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, if we'd like to add even more upgrades to the build by going over budget, on the creature side of things we can consider trading out Bonnie Paul Clearcutter for Spawning Kraken, which turns every single one of our pseudo-changelings into repeatable sources of 9/9 tokens as they get in for damage, which in turn create more 9/9s themselves to flood our board with enormous bodies. Or, on the land side of things, we can replace Pull from Tomorrow with Nadu Winged Wisdom, who turns every single everything counter we get onto our creatures into value in the form of extra land drops and draw, bench Cyclone Summoner in favor of Isai Tyrant of Gyre Strait, who nets us even more value in the form of extra land drops and draw as we get those lands into play. And if we want to modify our land base a bit more, we can terraform Lumbering Falls into Field of the Dead to turn every single one of our land drops into more token bodies on the table, which may be a bit pricey, but at least won't force us to go into massive debt unlike other lands I could mention. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, with the Tricky Terrain Precon upgrade complete, the next build we'll be tackling will be the bin-centric Graveyard Overdrive Precon and its face commander, Disa the Relentless, so look forward to that build coming soon. In the meantime though, we do have a new poll for you folks to vote on, and, as is tradition during the Precon season, it features all the alternate commanders from these Precons, all of which are vying for builds of their own. Those being the populating and proliferating dwarf, Kaith-famed mechanist, the experience accumulating and spawn/scion loving Eldrazi, Azlask the Swelling Scourge, the Arbor Elf spawning and land empowering elemental, Joti Moag Ancient, and a graveyard value and power generating human, Corum the Undertaker. So be sure to cast your vote, link in the description, before the deadline on June 21st, and let me know in the comments which commander you voted for and which commanders from this set you'd like to see me feature in future polls. And again, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Consider donating to buy me a coffee or use my Game Nerds affiliate link if you want to support the channel directly. And if you'd like to see more videos like this one, either click on the videos floating around my head for the latest builds, or click on the card above for a playlist of all the deck techs I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.